The storm rolled over the wide Wyoming plains like an angry beast, pounding the lonely ranch with sheets of rain that swallowed the moonlight. Inside that battered wooden cabin stood Elias Brackett, the rancher the whole county whispered about, the man who had lost everything except the land beneath his boots and the ghosts in his eyes. He lived in silence, working from dawn to dusk, eating little, sleeping less, and speaking almost never. But on this night, as thunder cracked across the dark sky, someone beat at his door with a force that nearly split it off its hinges. When Elias opened it, lantern in hand, rain dripping from his shoulders, he saw her, Clara Vale, the towering widow known across the frontier not just for her size, but for her strength, her tragedy, and the long shadow she cast across rumor and campfire stories. They called her the Giant Widow. Though it wasn't an insult, it was recognition. She stood 6'5", broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that turned rooms silent and made grown men straighten their posture. She was soaked, shivering, and staring at Elias with a fire in her eyes he had never seen before. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling in a way that didn't fit the woman known for lifting hay bales like feathers and breaking up bar fights with one arm. "I need shelter." He let her in without a word. She stepped inside, ducking beneath the doorframe, water dripping off her long black coat. The lantern light flickered across her sharp features, high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes filled with a mix of pain and desperation. As she wrung out her hair by the fireplace, she spoke suddenly, startling him. "I need something else too," she said, turning to face him. Her voice weighted with something he couldn't name. "I need to make love. Don't move." She had never spoken like this, never spoken at all to him, really, except for polite greetings in town. But now her words were trembling, raw, and hollowed by loneliness so deep it shook her entire body. Elias froze, not out of fear of her size, but because of the unexpected vulnerability in her voice. He saw something behind her eyes, not desire, but agony. Clara took one step toward him, then another, until she towered over him like a mountain of sorrow. But as she lifted her trembling hands toward his shoulders, Elias did something no one expected. Something no rancher in his right mind would do when faced with the most intimidating woman in the frontier. He gently took her wrists, not forcefully, just enough to stop her motion, and whispered, "Clara, what happened to you?" That single question broke her. Her breath shuddered as tears filled her eyes, and suddenly she collapsed onto her knees, not because of weakness, but because she had held in her grief so long that it finally tore loose. "They killed him," she whispered, voice cracking apart. "My husband, they came for him, and now they're coming for me." Elias knelt with her, steadying her shoulders. She wasn't seeking intimacy. She was seeking refuge from the terror she couldn't outrun. She had misread her own fear as desire, reaching for anything, any connection, that might anchor her to life for one more night. "Clara," Elias said softly, "you don't need what you think you need. You need rest. You need safety. And I'll make sure you have it." She buried her face in her hands, shaking, until Elias wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her to the warm hearth. He brewed her tea, sat near her but not too close, letting her breathe. Slowly, she told him everything. Her husband, a gentle blacksmith, had been threatened by a group of land thieves trying to force settlers off their claims. He had refused to leave. 3 nights ago, they burned his forge, ambushed him, and left him dead in the dust. When Clara found his body, she vowed to stay and fight for his legacy. But when she realized she was being hunted next, she fled through the storm to the only person she believed could help a widow with nothing left to lose, Elias Brackett, the rancher who had once lost his wife and child to the same kind of men. That's why she came to him, not for passion, but because he understood grief better than anyone alive. Though she couldn't say those words, her trembling body had spoken them. As the storm raged on, Elias stood, took down his rifle from the mantel, and looked at her with a quiet fire in his chest. "Clara," he said, "if someone is coming for you, then they're coming here. And if they're coming here, they're going to learn what a mistake that is." She stared at him, confusion mixing with awe. "But why?" Elias breathed out slowly. "Because you came to me for help, and nobody leaves my home afraid." As the cabin trembled from thunder, Clara whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time in 3 years, Elias felt alive again. Not because a woman had asked something of him, but because protecting her felt like protecting the part of himself he had lost long ago. Yet neither of them knew that the men hunting Clara were already riding through the storm. And before dawn, the ranch would become a battlefield. Dawn broke slowly, pushing soft blue light across the soaked plains, revealing wagon tracks and hoofbeats that circled the ranch like wolves testing a sleeping beast. Elias didn't wake Clara immediately. She slept curled near the fire, blanket wrapped tightly around her, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. In the quiet morning glow, she looked years younger, smaller somehow, though Elias knew that when awake she stood like a living pillar, strong, unbending, and built from grief and grit. He stepped silently outside, the wet earth squishing beneath his boots, scanning the horizon. That's when he saw them. 4 riders, silhouettes against the rising sun, holding rifles and moving with the confidence of men who believed the law bowed to them. Elias returned inside, set the iron bar across the door, and gently touched Clara's shoulder. Her eyes snapped open instantly, solid, alert, a survivor's instinct roaring to life. "They're here," he whispered. Clara rose to her full height, her expression switching from fear to fury. "Then let me face them." Elias shook his head. "No, they're armed. They're looking for you. They want you dead." Clara clenched her fists. "I'm not hiding while someone else fights for me." Elias walked past her, loading his rifle with the practiced calm of a man who had known violence too well. "You're not hiding," he said. "You're surviving. There's a difference." But as the first knock thundered against the door, loud, mocking, confident, Clara stepped forward, towering over Elias himself. He glanced at her and felt a spark of something he hadn't felt since his wife's last breath, trust. And so he nodded. Clara opened the door. Standing outside were the 4 killers, faces twisted with arrogance, eyes cold as the steel they carried. Their leader, a scarred man named Rig Dalton, grinned as if he'd already won. "Well, well, the big widow herself. Thought you could run?" Clara didn't flinch, didn't tremble. She stared straight into the eyes of the man who murdered her husband and said, "This is your last chance to leave." Rig laughed. "She thinks she can scare us." But before he could finish the thought, something happened no one expected. Elias stepped out from behind her, not with rage, not with panic, but with the calm authority of a man who had buried far too many people to tolerate more injustice. "You boys are trespassing," he said. "That means the law's on my side." "Law?" Rig spat. "There's no law out here." Elias raised one eyebrow. "There is today." The tension cracked like lightning. One of Rig's men moved his hand toward his revolver, but Clara reacted first. With a roar fueled by grief and raw strength, she grabbed the man by the front of his coat and lifted him off the ground, hurling him into the mud like a sack of grain. The others froze in shock. Rig swung his rifle toward her, but Elias slammed the barrel aside, grabbed Rig's wrist, and twisted hard. The rifle dropped. Chaos erupted. Fists, boots, mud, shouts. Clara and Elias fought not as strangers, but as 2 halves of a single storm. Clara's strength met Elias's precision. Elias's calm met Clara's fury, and within minutes the riders were beaten, disarmed, and crawling in the dirt like the cowards they were. Elias kicked Rig's rifle aside and said, "You're going to leave this land, and you're never going to hunt her again. If you do, I'll bury you in it." Rig spat blood, glared up at Clara towering over him, and snarled, "This isn't finished." Clara leaned forward, her shadow swallowing him whole. "Yes," she said with iron in her voice. "It is." The men fled, dragging their unconscious friend with them. When they disappeared beyond the ridge, Clara sank onto the porch, breath shaking from the adrenaline. Elias sat beside her, battered but steady. "You fought like a devil," he said. She chuckled weakly. "And you fought like a man who stopped being afraid a long time ago." They sat in silence, watching the rising sun burn gold through the clouds. Then Clara spoke softly. "Elias, what you did, you didn't have to." Elias stared across his land. "Maybe I did," he said. "Maybe I've been waiting for something worth standing up for again." Clara turned toward him, and for a moment the world stilled. Not with passion, not with heat, but with something far deeper. A connection forged not in desire, but in survival and understanding. Elias stood and offered her his hand. "Stay here," he said. "At least for a while. You've lost everything, and I've been living like a dead man. Maybe we can rebuild something." Clara hesitated. "Do you mean that?" I don't say things I don't mean. She nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes, but this time they were not from grief. They were from relief, hope, and something new beginning. As they stepped back into the cabin together, the storm clouds finally broke for good, sunlight flooding the ranch. And from that moment on, the lonely rancher and the giant widow weren't two broken souls running from the past. They were two warriors stepping into a future neither believed they deserved, but both were finally ready to fight for.